So this is a recent post. I always like to start with something recent on the platform. We've been working. This was from Tropical Storm Eta in Miami. We're working now directly with the city of Miami so that iSeeChange posts go directly to departments there for capital projects, because they realize and understand how important it is to validate models. Models are our best guess and by no means representative of a phenomena that is constantly changing. In many respects, we understand that engineering is principled on this idea of stationarity, that what you build is designed for 50 years. But we understand that our baseline is changing quite rapidly. So even if we think we know what's going on today, community members are critical parts of an engineering process, of the adaptation process, of the conversation about what we need to be doing, because our current conditions are constantly in flux. So I'm just going to a little background about me. I actually have a background in anthropology. Really geeky kid. I was a researcher, a field researcher, and kind of spending time in communities that were not my own allowed me to understand my own community better, frankly. I was a climate science reporter for over a decade. And over that time, I saw the same mistakes happening. Top-down, well-intentioned solutions were failing to meet and keep pace with local needs. And that's really one of the fundamental kind of aspects of the DNA of iSeeChange. I am a Gulf Coast native. I grew up on a barrier island in the Gulf of Mexico, Clearwater Beach. I was rescued by the National Guard when we were 12, and when the Gulf of Mexico came into our living room in the middle of the night. And I am a mom, so I do appreciate that a lot of what I'm doing is for me, for us, but very much around what our future holds. Most of what you see on iSeeChange is I'm not responsible for. In fact, the people who talk to you on iSeeChange are not necessarily me. I'm surrounded by an incredible team. One of them, members of my team, is on this call right now. Her name is Sam Harrington. Sam wave. In fact, it was Sam who whittled down this deck to make sure that we could spend enough time on the how to iSeeChange as well as the why. And it is often Sam who is sending notifications to our community members when we start to see real events happening in real time. Okay, so our mission is to connect people to each other in their changing environments, to make solutions together. And we are a mission-oriented company. We are technically not a nonprofit. We are a company. We came from a public media background, and we have a public media DNA. But I just want to make sure that everyone knows that it can be confusing. We still have our .org URL, but we crowdsource and analyze community microdata to inform public project planning, adaptation, and design. But at the heart of it is really connecting people through their climate stories. The platform mobilizes community members like y'all to share personal stories, photos, and measurements all together. Those are really critical, all three of those things. There are different forms of data and there are different forms of evidence. And our goal is not just about data, but creating a dialogue among our neighbors. That is really, really critical, especially when we talk about solutions and consensus, especially when we talk about, is it a pump? Is it a grant? Is it maybe a conversation about moving our community or buyouts? So dialogue is really critical. You have to remember your neighbor is your first responder. And so we are building a community that is rooted in its own power. We do not empower. And the cohesion is critical to our response to climate change. So as much as we talk about evidence and data, the cohesion and the dialogue is just as important. So how do individuals and groups use our platform? There are different reasons that people come to us. We want to make a space to appeal to not just flooding. And that's one thing I think that is really critical. When it floods, we know that that's a one moment, but there are so many other changes happening in our community. So we do encourage folks to use the platform broadly. But the uses are around these three ideas. One is participating in a public record of the lived climate and weather experience. So a lot of our weather patterns are rooted in signals that happen months before. Whether or not you are dry in the winter can really affect what happens to you in the summer. We're building an awareness and evidence base for local weather and climate concerns. So it's really important to know what the real problems are and what the real impacts are to be able to target solutions. And then we're adding this insight and critical data to these projects where we have partners working on public infrastructure, adaptation policy, or education. So we do work with engineering firms. We do work with cities. We do work with with project-oriented initiatives. Okay, so this is what we are really interested in, how to use iSeeChange, right? So it's as easy as Facebook. I know you guys are all on it. You should be able to create an account using your email. We are looking at using your phone number as an alternative to be able to be more equitable to folks who don't necessarily use email. But again, it's very simple. And easy and free. Anyone in the world uses iSeeChange. We have users across 118 countries. Report on things that matter to you. Obviously, most of the crew here is interested in flooding, but like I said, it can be really helpful to use iSeeChange to talk about first spring blooms, extreme heat, different kinds of weather events. So that one, it's fluid to you, and you have this active community engaging on it. And it's not so foreign when that weather event does happen and you're not necessarily as unfamiliar about how to respond. So I'm going to look through moving my Zoom here so that I can see the screen a little easier. I'm going to move through the post flow just really quickly here. So when you log into iSeeChange, there's a plus button where you can add a sighting. There's also an investigations tab about where and how, the kinds of topics that we cover. Hold on one second, someone's trying to ping me right quick. Put that away. So basically, if you log into to iSeeChange from a specific location where we have a dedicated project or a dedicated community, you will see storms and flooding with your community highlighted at the top. That usually means that we have agreed to a specific investigation in your community. So if you log in from New Orleans or Miami or Boston or Ocean City, we actually launched that feature for them because so many of them came onto the platform and they were using the platform so often. So if we see that kind of activity, we will launch new features for you. It really, really depends on how many people come in. For pro bono work, that's what we will consider. But the city of Miami is paying for theirs. The Stantec and here in New Orleans is an engineering firm and they're paying for theirs. But in the post, when you put in storms and flooding, no matter where you are in the world, you are asked just to tell us the story and to take a picture. Those two things, they are very simple. It's traditional social media, but you can learn so much from those two things alone. So even if you don't have any equipment, even if you're not out there measuring water height, if you just tell us where the flooding is happening, when, and how you're impacted, that is a really great start. It doesn't take much to start understanding hydrology and what kinds of events cause what kinds of flooding. So when we understand there's an area of interest that is probably getting hit harder in ways than it should be, or there's an area of interest that the community cares about, that allows our team and potentially partners on the ground to really focus on specific locations, specific intersections. Obviously, the Ocean City crew, we know all about Haven. That is a most photographed street in the city of Ocean City. But it is we call those hot spots, areas that we know might deserve a little bit more attention. The date, time, location is really critical. We ask you to tell us where your home location is when you sign up. We never display your home location, your address out, publicly. But it allows us to know if you live in Ocean City and if we should send you a notification if it's flooding, right? But when you post, we ask you again to show us exactly where you saw what you saw when you saw it. So potentially you took a picture of flooding and you didn't have the time to post that moment. You can always go back and post what we call back post at any time. So you just adjust the date and time and the location to match what you saw, where you saw it, when you saw it. When you click on storms and flooding, you know, each one of these investigations have different data inputs. So wildfires, extreme heat, those are asking for temperature details. With flooding, we're really interested in a couple of things. And maybe some of y'all are very familiar with this just out of your own experience. The first thing we'll ask you is how much rain fell? Now, to answer that question, you either need to have a rain gauge, which is a National Weather Service instrument, and we're happy to show you how to use those if you're interested. It is a higher ask, right? The first ask we tell you is, tell us what you saw, where you saw it, tell us the story about how you're impacted, any details about your life, which are really important to planners, really important to engineers. But if you want to go that next step further and start gathering more details about what kinds of flooding are happening at what kind, during what kinds of storms, the first thing we'll ask you is how much rain fell. So again, that's what we call a detail in the details and sensors section of the post. So if you have a rain gauge, you want to measure it after the storm. If you have a weather station, your weather station will be able to tell you how much rain fell during that event. But what we're really after is rain intensity. Does everyone, and please interrupt me. This is for the higher ground. So please interrupt me if you feel like I'm using terminology that doesn't make sense. Rain intensity. Oh, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, I muted everyone, so feel free.
Okay. Well, just raise your hand. I'll try and keep eyes out on the. But Harry, if you see someone raising their hand, just interrupt us.
Yeah.
Okay. So when FEMA says that was a 100-year rain event, and I'm sure y'all have heard that kind of terminology, right? That was a 100-year rain event. There was a 20-year rain event. That was a 5-year rain event. This is a moving baseline of understanding of how often this kind of event happens in your location. This is not a fixed definition because, again, our baseline is moving. And the way we decide something is a 100-year rainstorm or a 10-year rainstorm starts with intensity. How much rain fell in what time period, okay? Now, when we ask for details about a rainstorm, about a flood event, most people don't have these details. It's fine. We ask you not to feel compelled to fill out everything in the details section. This is like that one extra. If you want 5 gold stars in recording and storms and flooding. If you're hosting a rain gauge, we'll ask you to measure it after the event. And we'll ask maybe if you happen to remember when the storm started and when it stopped. Now, if you don't know that, that's okay, because there are weather stations, there are radar feeds. We can go back if it was a really intense event and figure out when the start and stop times were. But what really changes from location to location is volume. So during a rain event in my neck of the woods, I've measured a 5-year weather event, but half a mile down the road measured a 20-year rain event. Okay, and that puts different stresses on our local infrastructure. Most city infrastructure is designed for a certain kind of threshold, a 2-year rainstorm, a 5-year rainstorm, or a 10-year rainstorm. And most engineered solutions are going to hit that range. Once we get out of the 10-year rainstorm, that's when we really start to see the limits of what any one city system can do. And that's where we see more flooding, more intensity. Now, the other kind of variable from an engineering, from a hydrology perspective, is going to be how the flooding event itself. So here's the rain event, it's the causative agent, but then each location is behaving and responding to these storm events very differently. So I may get a 5-year rainstorm and my neighbor may get a 5-year rainstorm, but depending on where we live and how our infrastructure is performing, I may have gotten 2 foot of water and they may have gotten in 2.5. And that'll depend on the elevation, which is constantly changing. It's not fixed necessarily. It may depend on local, and you guys all know this. Again, you're some of the most flood aware people in the world. It may depend on a local development. It may depend on whether my catch basin or storm drain has been collecting a lot of garbage. If my storm drain is not necessarily functioning the way it's supposed to be, maybe there's a broken pipe, or maybe I live in a low in the neighborhood that requires more attention. So we ask folks to tell us if it's flooding, yes, no, that binary data. Flooding start, stop. That's another line in the hydrology, right? So there are areas in my neighborhood where during a rain event, it is flooded for 24 hours, but maybe a block away, it's not. That level of granularity really adds value to understanding the hydrology of a neighborhood, okay? So if you happen to know when that flooding stopped, that is a really important point in the data. Another add to this, and actually I'm gonna see if I can stop share real quick and open up the iSeeChange website, because this deck is out of date. We added a third variable, and I'm just going to show it real quick. I can find it right here, which is flood height. Okay, so if you are the most dedicated flood person, I don't have insurance for you people, so do not take unnecessary risks during flood storms. Safety first. But if you happen to be out there and you happen to have the ability to measure how high the water got, you can add flood height into the post now. And what we ask you to do is to pick a spot that you can measure again easily. Obviously, Ocean City went an extra step and they put bands around utility poles. We use signs, we use utility poles, you can use stairs. But one thing that's really, really useful is to measure next to a storm drain. And I'll tell you why. When the city is doing its hydrology and it's hiring an engineering firm to run its hydrology, to run its model, they need known datums, known points to measure against. And one of the easiest datums in the model to find is a storm drain. That's, and so you're going to measure potentially from the bottom of the storm drain. You know how there's a top and there's a bottom. You're going to measure from the bottom up to that water line. And you can take a picture of what you see, but please enter the quantitative data into the data details section of iSeeChange. A lot of folks have been using rain gauges and just taking pictures of their rain gauges, or a lot of folks have just been putting range 6 inches in their data, and then Sam has to go and correct that. We really would love you guys to just go ahead and add it straight into the data details. And our team is making this much more legible when you come into iSeeChange for the storms and flooding investigation. Now, this is like the very few people do this work, but I tell you, it really makes a difference when you do. And I'll show you a few examples, okay? So I'm gonna go back to our slides. I'm gonna stop sharing here. Let's reshare. Back to the thing. Here we go. Okay. So let's see. Here we go. Again, it shows up in your post, under details. We do not encourage you to show the exact location or to write the exact location in your post. Again, we want people to feel safe sharing data. So we know on the back end exactly where your flooding is. When we do mapping, we obfuscate the exact location of that post, but we want to show neighborhood level flooding to keep everyone safe. Another thing about iSeeChange is again, in a few communities, we have committed to sending notifications. So if you live in New Orleans or Miami or Boston or Ocean City, and we get a post from those communities and it comes on our phones, we will send a text message via the app to the community to let them know that flooding is happening. And then encourage people to obviously share what they're seeing, but also, kind of keep everyone aware to kind of A, there's flooding happening, B, if you're seeing it too, amplify the signal that somebody has done. We will not send a notification if if the National Weather Service says there's flooding, but we don't see a post on iSeeChange. We are very careful about over notifying community members. We all have experienced a lot of intense flooding events, I think, to know how over notification can really, really mess with your peace of mind when you live in a flooded community. I certainly do myself. But we do our best, and we are not an emergency service, but we are often hearing about flooding before the National Weather Service sends out a hazard alert. Okay. So how has this been used and why? Again, when it comes to modeling, cities and engineering firms and planners are using these visualizations of flooding. They're outdated often, they're hypothetical, but most importantly, and this is why those stories really matter when you put in your post, it's lacking context, community experience, that detail about how this impacts you and why it matters. You know, there's some folks who are just posting like floods, you know, I appreciate that. But, you know, if you tell me that it really impacts the fact that you can't get to work, that you can't access your mailbox, that your children don't feel safe playing in their yard, that really, really matters. Again, another problem that we're solving for with iSeeChange, engaging residents. Harriet is one of the most brilliant engagers in the world when it comes around flooding, right? But we know that in any given community that the city is not good at this. Even it's very challenging even for us, you know, when you want to organize a group of people to show up at a public meeting and hey, you know, we want to get the word out about an ordinance, or hey, we want everyone to come in and have their voice heard about a stormwater mitigation project in our neighborhood. That's time. And the people who are most impacted by these events are the least able to spend time in public meetings. So, you know, we provide a mechanism in which this engagement can happen without taxing people's time. This is the most important. The details that we lose, the people who are missing at the table when it comes to hearing about these events. The more we report about our real life experiences, the better we can target solutions. So this is Ocean City, New Jersey. Again, I wanted to start with a flood forum, higher ground city, where we were working with a Thriving Earth Exchange hydrologist. We were working with Suzanne's group, the group at large, because I know, it's an incredible amount of. Rick is our resident rain gauge keeper. He's one of the most diligent rain gauge keepers I know. And I see his posts every day, all the time. And he's the one rain gauge keeper for the entire island, really. I mean, there's a few others, but Rick is the most diligent. And what Rick's data has been able to do has demonstrated that very moderate rains combined with moderate tides are creating significant flooding. So I believe NOAA predicted that coastal New Jersey is supposed to get 40 flood events a year. We're seeing more than double that, thanks to Rick and the Ocean City and Suzanne and everyone in Ocean City. And it's this very rare that we can combine tidal data and rain gauge data together to understand overlapping risk. We also have seen the community talk about how important these flood infrastructure projects have been and significantly successful. And there's been a lot of support for more of them, although, you know, we've seen events where those particular pump infrastructures have not performed as well as we would like. Point is, these events, the way our community is responding to flooding is in a constant flux, constant. So we know it was working at this level and we knew it failed over here, and understanding the difference collectively helps us understand what kinds of rain events are causing what kinds of flooding and what kinds of solutions are well adapted to one kind of flooding. And then if we're failing in other kinds of flooding, what else do we need to do? So again, it's a constant dialogue. It's a constantly moving impact. And please, Rick, raise your hand if I get something wrong. I see I've only got 6 people on my Zoom preview and I see your face right there. So I'm going
Julia, this is Suzanne. I just wanted to add real quick, in addition to everything else you said. part of what we find with Rick being, Ocean City, for those who don't know, is a small 7-mile barrier island. And we've noticed that I have a rain gauge, Rick has a rain gauge, and never does the data match.
That's so true.
And that's interesting for a small island that Rick, one of us, and it's usually Rick, gets more water than I do. I don't know why that is, but you know, it's just something that the city has never taken into account, that now they are, because we've been demonstrating that through iSeeChange.
That's wonderful to hear. And you know, it's surprising how these basic things like temperature and rainfall are still being understood. So topography can make a huge difference in terms of where, what neighborhoods are receiving what kinds of rain events. So for example, in New Orleans, one thing that we've discovered, we've been able to document, is that ironically, our lowest lying neighborhoods are getting the more intense rainstorms. They're in the center of our bowl, and we have the lake on one side and the river on one side. And often when we get weather events, they're stalling against each other with crosswinds right in the middle of the city, which is where we have our lowest lying neighborhoods. So the fact that you're seeing this pattern over and over again, it may not be an accident and may in fact be significant. But the more we hear about this, you know, Suzanne and Rick are not, you know, scientists, but you live in a neighborhood your whole life, you pay attention to it, you are an expert in that neighborhood. And that is the DNA of iSeeChange, is that we need this expertise from the neighbors, from our neighbors, block to block, contributing ideas and suggestions about what works and what doesn't. And making sure that the top-down city engineers and the community data and the community insights are meeting in the middle to produce better solutions. Because we don't do anything by ourselves very well. But when we all work together, we, you know, and I know it sounds really kumbaya, these are all really challenging spaces, but the information that we bring to the table helps us all kind of see the same picture. Okay, sorry, I get very excited about Ocean City. You guys inspire me all the time. Okay, hold on one second. Okay, no, wait, did I miss? Oh yeah, so New Orleans. So this is where we did a lot of our prototyping of the ideas that you guys are hearing about. And this is going to be a factor as we see more and more investment coming out of the new administration. So during the Obama administration, they had the National Resilience by Design competition. It was focused on specific cities. New York and New Jersey actually were eligible for this, and New York did get a bunch of money after Sandy. We got money because of Hurricane Isaac that year in 2012. And the idea was for us to design more resilient, you know, communities. So we got a huge HUD grant to focus on 7 projects across a huge neighborhood. It was going to be called the Gentilly Resilience District, multi-million-dollar HUD funded infrastructure. We started using iSeeChange just to even see if flooding was really important to these people, because these ideas came from the engineers and the city without any feedback from residents. And it turned out we were seeing more flooding in these neighborhoods, but not in the places that the model suggested, and not at the severity that certain neighborhoods were experiencing. So we were used in 2 out of the 7 projects by the engineers. Again, the citizens all contributing the same kind of data that Rick and Suzanne are talking about: photos, stories, rain gauge data. And then we were able to compare that to the models. So from that data, we were able to say, okay, April 4th was a 2-year rain event, and these projects are designed for the 2 to 5 year event. This is what flooding looks like today. This project better hit that mark when it goes in. And then we started noticing that one neighborhood in particular, which was low income and wasn't getting the same amount of money as the other projects because of benefit cost analysis and kind of how FEMA and HUD work. And we were like, you know what? This neighborhood's not getting enough money. And we brought the data to the engineers that there was a mismatch in the modeling. After 29 flood events were documented on iSeeChange, they redid the modeling and we were right. As a result, $6 million was added to the project to make it one of the, if it's approved, and it's, you know, because we've added money to the project, it has to go through a whole level of approvals and bureaucracy. But if approved, it will be the largest underground stormwater storage unit of its kind in the South ever installed. And that was iSeeChange data that moved that needle. And we're really proud about that. But it takes a long time. This was 3 years worth of data, stories, photos, showing up, partnering with the engineers, you know, instead of, you know, that allowed us to have open conversations with them. And we were able to move the needle. So this is where, I think I had a couple other use cases in here, but this is where I want to stop talking and do a little listening and think through how you all might use iSeeChange. We focus a lot about the quantitative data. Qualitative, like story data, is just as important, particularly when we're having tough conversations about what the solution should be. I know a few of you are thinking or talking about managed retreat, and we have been invited into managed retreat projects here in Louisiana. So the more we can kind of talk about it, the more I'm happy to answer questions and or kind of just hear what your interests lie, where your interests lie in using the tool.
Thank you so much. Do you want to unshare so that we
Yeah,
can?
let's do that. Hold on 1 second.
Oh,
well, here's my contact details. I'm always bad about promoting the things. Like, this is where you find iSeeChange. Download it right now. Don't wait, and don't lurk. Make an account, sign up, post about what you see outside your window. It does not have to be meaningful. If it's a beautiful day, share it with us. That's still awesome. And we love using iSeeChange that way. All right, now I'm gonna stop share. All right, cool.
I just wanted to say one thing that was partly prompted me to back out and say we must get Julia and Sam in the room. So we've been working with a group in Charleston who are trying to fight two developments, and expert scientist Steve Emmerman has been working with them, and he went through literally years of Facebook posts in order to sort of tag them, date them, everything, in order to show that the developments were in violation of their own stormwater manual. But it was incredibly cumbersome and required his dedication. You could just, you know, with your recording, could really start to do that yourself. So that's why these things, if you're fighting development and you need to show the existing failure of infrastructure, which is what he was able to do, then you can start to fight a development more robustly. But let's go over Tim's thoughts.
So Sam is chiming in. Tom Harrington found the same thing when he was trying to use Facebook for Ocean Cities data. And there's a couple things that you just keep in mind. Facebook is not always showing you reality. It is showing you what it thinks you want to see. So the algorithm is actually changing around the chronology, changing things around. So we are one singular place where you can see what's happening. And I gotta say, when I was in a hurricane, recently Hurricane Zeta came over us, going to iSeeChange was so comforting because I didn't have to deal with Facebook and all its crap to understand what was happening in the town. But that's me personally, but Tom Harrington, I've had the same issue with trying to scrape Facebook for data. We validate your location, we have date, time, we have, and those are really critical. Those are basic things that Facebook doesn't do well. And Twitter, same. And so we're a social media platform that's dedicated to, again, having these conversations in a really productive and meaningful way without the noise. But then the data that we use is designed, and the data we collect is designed exactly for this. So yeah.
And then before I see that Queen Quet has a question, before I go on to you, Queen Quet, just one thing, because I know it's been an issue around numbers of people who are reporting. How many people do you have to have reporting in a community for that information to be useful?
I can actually answer that now. Okay, so here's the thing, and I want you to keep in mind, real important. We have seen designs change based on one post. And that's amazing, right? So one guy, 4 blocks in from where the flood model stops, is telling us about severe flooding that isn't in the model. And he posted once, we paid attention, we said, hey, That's significant. Would you tell us if that happens again? He posts again. You know, so again, that's the validation that's pretty minimal validation, but it's critical. So just keep that in mind. Every post is significant. That's what's very unusual about iSeeChange. But if we were going to say, like, if I were going to look and say, okay, where have we really moved the needle and what level of participation have we really seen things move? In Ocean City, in New Orleans, where else did we do that analysis? I don't know what it looks like in Miami right now, but we've seen as little as 1% of a neighborhood or a city using iSeeChange has made a difference, has changed a model, like surprised us. And that's not much. So even though it feels like it doesn't feel like as enormous as Facebook, it's still, the data matters that can be very meaningful at a very low level. But the more you use iSeeChange, the more alive it is. So, and the more people you bring on, the more we pay attention, the more we're more likely to kind of launch a map or say, okay, we'll add you to our notification list. And it really depends on our communities. Like, we are community built and community co-created, and we're community responsive.
Thank you. Queen Quet.
Peace, everyone. Glad for day with all 100 children one more again. Julia, I think everybody else here knows who I am, but I'm Queen Quet. I'm chiefess and head of state for the Gullah Geechee Nation. So I live literally in the Atlantic Ocean on the Sea Islands. So, for one coastal girl to another, hugs, right? Yes. So I wanted to ask you a couple of things. First, I want to tell everybody what happened as soon as I went over to iSeeChange and created my account while you were talking. I'm a computer scientist, so I like to go ahead and work with the tool once you tell me where it is. So I went on and created my account on my laptop. And the first thing that popped up in the images is from Ironton, Ohio. Well, I have a Queen Quet Day in Ironton, Ohio, and that was in fact the first city to ever give me a Queen Quet Day. So you get kudos already just because I believe in divine order. So this must be a good tool for me to use, because that was the city that popped up with an image of flooding at the top of my page. And people normally never know where Ironton, Ohio is. So I want to share that with everybody.
That's so cool.
Isn't that so cool? And so I thought so too. So this is what I wondered though. In terms of data aggregation, I noticed that I went on and tried your coastal erosion feature immediately, but I just put it in for a month's worth of time. How often updated? Because it showed that there was nothing for my zip code, and I find that not to be possible, but I'm wondering how often is that, or how long of a stretch of time would I have to put in there to possibly get that data? And then also, you touched just on it just a minute ago, but I'd like you to detail a little bit more about your mapping features. So if people here on the Sea Islands started putting in data into this mechanism, how much data aggregation does it take? Do you have maps on there? Like, is there some link that we'll click to? Or
yes.
App and we'll see it?
Whew, so many good questions. Okay, so let me try and go in order from like the amazing awesomeness you dropped down, and then kind of move into the nitty gritty. Okay, so first of all, Queen Quet, is that Queen Quet? Okay.
Right.
So Queen Quet, it just so happens, and Sam is on the line right now, that we had a delayed project in coastal North Carolina, and I'm not sure exactly where you are, but we may be able to follow up with you specifically.
Wilmington, North Carolina is still in the Gullah Geechee Nation, so I work in Wilmington as well.
Sam, it's Wilmington. Okay, we have to have our own call. Yeah. Period. So we have some flood sensors that were given to us as a part of a prototyping project, in which we've had trouble because of COVID doing a lot of the Wilmington engagement that we were planning. So
so I'll drop my email.
Talk. Yeah, there's something really cool about this moment, and I just want to call that out. Yeah. So in terms of mapping, we custom launch the maps if per community. Okay. So, and we usually charge money for that. And again, we've done that with Ocean City pro bono because of the severity and the frequency that people were posting. Okay. And so we offer that as a pro bono service in response to communities using us. So if we see that a community is serious and ready to roll, and they're going to get 50 people, I don't even remember how many people right now are on from Ocean City, we will respond. And that means I will take my developers and say, take 4 hours and build a map for this community.
Okay.
And that's, you know, we have to otherwise survive as a company. So we otherwise charge money for additional features.
Okay.
For coastal erosion, great question. Now, some of our investigations have data entry and some do not. Okay. Now, a lot of that is because we're still iterating on whether or not a data entry is necessary for that particular investigation. If you're interested in documenting coastal erosion, I'll give you a few pointers. And I think it's really important for all the coasters to think about this. First of all, one thing you should also remember is that we're community created, co-designed. So remember I told you guys about how flood duration was an important variable in flood documentation? That didn't come from me and that didn't come from the engineers. That came from the residents who were like, you know what? I'm gonna Snapchat timestamp the length of time the water is staying on my street because it really annoys me. And then I turned around to the engineers and I was like, you guys, does the duration of the water really matter for your models and for like infrastructure? And they're like, yeah, really important. Sorry we forgot to tell you about that. Didn't even think about it, right? So the more you notice that something is important, we will pay attention. In terms of like photos, you might, for coastal erosion, there's a couple of things that are important to think through. Why we do king tide posting, and you guys know what king tide is, right? So we're talking about a super high tide that is often happening without rain, but it's a high tide event. What's really critical about that data is that you're taking a picture at a singular point in the water's movement and across the land or meeting of the land. So you might want to try and time your pictures for the same tidal moment. High tide is what canonically has been used. You could even do low tide, but you want to try and do it at the same moment in the tidal moment, right? And then you want to just take the same picture over and over and over again. Like, think of yourself as a National Geographic photographer doing a time lapse. We have used time-lapse photos. I mean, you want, you know, but they're really complicated to upload into iSeeChange as batches of like, you know, so you would want to, you know, if you wanted to take the same picture month over month, the thing about coastal erosion is it's slow. So you have to be really willing to invest in a slow documentation. What I like to see us do is work with holidays, because people remember holidays and people are always out on the beaches or in the parks on holidays. So if you decided to take high tide on, you know, the 4th of July in the same spot year over year, you would start to develop a record. Things like that. And that's a real slow game on iSeeChange, but we've been around for years and we've seen kinds of changes like that before. If there is a dramatic erosion event, obviously take a picture of that. Obviously document where and when you saw it so that we can backtrack and say, okay, what were the conditions here? Has it been drier that made the soil weak? Was it a monstrous nor'easter? Tons of Cape Cod folk have used iSeeChange in the past, and we've seen kind of dramatic nor'easter erosion events. And then think about things that I haven't thought about. That's what, but those are my kind of first thoughts around coastal erosion.
Okay, so you gave me the long version instead of Reader's Digest of why I don't see anything showing up there. I got you.
Yeah.
For my zip code.
I mean, for coastal erosion, again, the feed is organized by sightings.
Yeah.
Like you just have a general sightings feed.
Mm-hmm.
The experience on the web and the experience on your phone are different. So if you're using iSeeChange on your phone, I know exactly where you are and I'll give you a custom, it's easier to give you a custom sightings feed for your location.
Right. Okay.
On the web, you have to tell me where you are.
Right. Well, it actually asks you as well to tell them where you're located.
Or you can use the search bar and just put in your location, anywhere in the world, and it'll
I never use my
radius.
Devices for security purposes.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I got you. I saw it. Cool. Okay, I just wondered about that.
Yeah, no, it's great. And play around. We're making changes and improvements all the time. The team is playing around right now with a community page. So that one of the things that, oh, I see Rick's hand. I'll do this really fast. When we launched originally, we launched in a rural town where half the town worked as ranchers or coal miners, and most people did not believe in climate change. But what they really loved about iSeeChange was this notion of year to year seasonal variation, where they were like talking about their ski seasons. They were talking about dandelions blooming, drought cycles, and wildfire cycles all together as one community. So we're reintroducing community pages. I don't know when it will launch. We're just sketching it out. But ideally, when you log in, you'll see, you know, who's posted near you, who's been active, things like that. And that should not be a paid for feature. Hopefully that'll be available. We'll see when you log in from anywhere. Okay, Rick.
I just want to ask.
Oh, sorry, Rick. Just because Dawn was on before.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm not seeing everybody. Sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Dawn.
Oh, you're mute. You're muted. Can you unmute?
Okay. All right. Hi, I'm Dawn.
Hi, Dawn.
And I live in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And I'm actually a little more inland, about like a mile from the beach. But my community is up against the Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge, which is wetlands.
Yeah.
And on the other side of it is the Waccamaw River. Now, when Florence hit here, I wasn't living here at the time, but I've been talking to neighbors and everything. We didn't flood. This community didn't flood during Florence. It was at least a week afterwards. The Hurricane Florence went to North Carolina, rained there, and all their water raised our river and our creeks, and we had a whole cul-de-sac flood.
Oh man.
Now, is that something we can measure?
Yeah,
I
totally.
mean, it's
okay.
okay.
Yeah. So please do. It doesn't have to be rain fed. Again, if it's tidal flooding from king tides or nor'easter or whatever, but any kind of riverine flooding, the timing of it, the severity, the height, and what in that case, another data set that we would probably refer to would be a river gauge, just understanding the fluctuation of the gauge and comparing your flooding in your local neighborhood to the level of that gauge.
Right.
Also then referring to whatever data we happen to have on rain further north of you, if we happen to have had it. But obviously there's other kinds of, you know, again, one of the things about iSeeChange is we're not the singular source of data, but we are a way add value of detail and granularity to the instruments that are available. But yeah, and if you need to make an argument about upstream adaptation or mitigation that needs to happen to protect your cul-de-sac, then you start with just documenting. And again, if you have those photos, you can go back in time. Go back in time. Tell me what happened. Tell me the story. Tell me
video and photographs. And
so video. Until we get a huge splash of cash from we do not have bandwidth for video. Okay. So here's the thing. Obviously, send the video to Sam if you have it and you want us to like get a lot of attention or whatever. But what you need to do to enter data from your video is the following. You're going to take a screenshot. Now, if you're taking a video and you want to go back to your video, you press like 2 buttons on your phone and it'll make a screenshot. Like if I want to make a screenshot of all the random notifications I have on my phone, I just press these 2 little buttons and it makes a little photo. You see that? That photo is the photo I need in iSeeChange's database. Okay, it's real easy. If you're doing it, that's the easiest way to do it. And I think Samsung and Android have a similar feature, right? And then you just want to do the same thing you would do. Keep your video. Video is helpful, but we cannot host video right now. Will we? It's the most popularly asked. There are 2 things that iSeeChange needs to do from the community perspective. One, edit posts. We will have that soon. But 2 is video, and I can't do that at this stage, but by all means, when I am able to, I will.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. My question, this is Julie, is back to that coastal erosion. Okay.
Mhm.
Are you looking, I noticed you were talking about taking pictures the same time over a lengthy period of time to see what erosion is happening. I wanted to know, what about when we have a particular erosion occurrence, a single one?
Yeah.
Because if we don't do that, they just fill it in with more sand.
Yeah, no, do
next
it.
year.
Absolutely. Do it.
Okay.
No, so when you have an event, like the parking lot collapses or like a huge chunk of land is missing, I'll definitely document when, where, what you saw. But if you've got those baselines from before, you know what I'm saying? You need a little baseline. You need to know what it looked like before the event,
Oh, yeah.
right? So it's
Mhm.
good to be in the habit, but absolutely document the event, like the erosion event. If it's an eraser that takes a chunk out of your swampland or whatever. If you just happen to go on your boat and you see that, hey, there used to be an island there and there's no island now, of course, document it for sure.
Okay. That's good.
But being in the habit of just taking the baseline, in other words, a non-event, is really important. And to that point, one thing that you guys probably haven't thought about much, but we've been working with communities to train them in, is telling us when it rains and it doesn't flood.
Oh.
So when Haven doesn't flood in Ocean City, we need to know that. It's really important because it means that something is working. Whether it's a pump infrastructure or the storm drains.
Well, I think Suzanne would say that whenever it rains, even if it's a quarter of an inch, it probably floods at 14th and Haven. The other thing I asked Sam, and you can send it to me as she can, if about that you might know about smart rain gauges, because I had to slosh back in my backyard.
Sorry. I feel you. Okay, so Rick, I have to say, I'm going to recommend, because you're such a dedicated, there's two things about the rain gauge, two things about the manual rain gauges. So we are using a national, shoot, I don't have one right here. I have one in the garage, but I don't want to leave the thing. So we're using a national, Sam, would you throw the link to the National Weather Service standard rain gauge that we use on iSeeChange?
Yeah, it's in the chat already.
Solid. Okay, so we're using the same standard mechanism that the National Weather Service uses. Now, one thing about the National Weather Service is they use both mechanical rain gauges, like tipping rain gauges, smart rain gauges or whatnot, and they still have backup manual gauges. And there's a reason for that. We ask people to use the regular rain gauges, one, because they're cheap, relatively, they're $40, which, is cheap to some people, but expensive to others. And so, and the other thing about a rain gauge is that it teaches you in a very visceral way what kinds of rain events you're getting and what kinds of flooding you're getting. So after 3 months of using a rain gauge, most people understand and don't have to fear rainstorms, in the sense that I know what kind of rain intensity or rain event is going to flood my neighborhood because of my rain gauge. And sometimes I get a little wet. I keep mine by my car. You want to keep it in a place where you see it regularly, where it's accessible, but you might get a little wet, or, I've done some crazy things where it's lightning and my husband's like, don't go out there. And I'll go and, don't do that. Be safe. But there's a point in which, if you want to upgrade to have a really good data collection, backup, option, for about $150, you can buy a weather station. And the weather station, is using a tipping rain gauge. So it's like a little spoon, and it's just measuring how often it moves, like how often it fills up and then dumps. Now, the thing about the tipping rain gauge and why the National Weather Service keeps the manual gauge is that during an extreme event, it will fail very often. Recently, during Hurricane Zeta, my rain gauge and my weather station did not have the same measurement. So it's helpful to have both, but you got to be like one of the nerdiest iSeeChangers ever. Rick is probably one of my favorite rain gauge keepers, so you should probably get a weather station, and and it helps when you want to look at it and say, okay, here was the rain intensity. It
It was
wasn't
just
home.
my laziness, that's all.
No, it's helpful. It's really helpful.
What-
And then you would just enter that manually into iSeeChange. You know, we are looking at integrating the Weather Underground API into iSeeChange, but we haven't been able to do that yet. But
Julia,
But,
what type is your weather station? He was wondering. We can send it to you later.
We'll send it
too.
to you. It's like ambient
Okay.
weather, and then they keep changing. It's an osprey. You know, and it's handy.
Okay, cool.
It's handy. Yeah,
Thanks.
no problem.
Hour, and we're going to have to close this off. I did want to just do one thing, which was remind all of you that if you feel that you need this data but don't quite know what you'll do with it, remember that we have our partnership with the Thriving Earth Exchange that allows you to get matched with a pro bono scientist who can then use that data to map up with other local sources of data to help support whatever it is you're advocating for. So so there's a nice link there.
Yeah, and if we have bandwidth, we can help out too. We've been adjacent to the text teams for several projects, and we just did a pretty decent analysis for the city of Miami, but only if we have bandwidth. I know we're pretty tight, but I will say this one thing to as we've been talking about data, as we've been talking about rain intensity, the thing that really stands out is in the data. It's so simple: is those photos and the stories. There are things that I cannot tell about a rain event that only you know. Never rains here. I mean, never floods here. That catch basin's been acting funny. The pump, I've been wondering about it. Or again, this is the third time I've lost my car. These are things that I can't tell from a photo that are so critical and powerful when you bring it to your city council, when you bring it into a developer conversation, when you bring it to the engineers. And I can't express that more, that is so, so important for achieving the goals that you want to achieve. The photo and the story, add the data, and then bam, you've got what you need to achieve your goals.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And if your community does start to use iSeeChange, can you let me know? Because it's sort of helpful for me to know, and then I understand how it's being used and what else, etc. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a lovely Friday evening, all of you. Lovely to see you. Oh, and we have another National Leaders Forum meeting in another couple of weeks, which is a kind of end of year goodbye, things to think about for 2021. So look forward to seeing you then.